On the morning of Independence Day, 1954, a call goes out from Bay Village. Mayor Spencer Hoke receives a call from his neighbor, Dr. Sam Sheppard. The message is garbled, desperate. "My God, Spencer, get over here quick. I think they've killed Marilyn." When authorities arrive, they find a scene of brutality. Marilyn Sheppard, 4 months pregnant, bludgeoned to death in her bed. The bedroom is covered in blood spatter, but immediately, the forensic reality of the crime scene begins to recede, replaced by a narrative constructed, not by detectives, but by the press. From minute one, the physics of the room didn't matter. What mattered was the character of the husband. Sam Sheppard testified that he was asleep downstairs, heard screams, ran up, and grappled with a white-biped form, or a bushy-haired intruder. He claimed he was knocked unconscious twice, once in the bedroom and once on the beach. But the police didn't see a victim of assault, they saw a lying husband because the house dog didn't bark, and there was no sign of forced entry. On the night of Saturday, the 3rd of July, 1954, Dr. Sam Sheppard and his pregnant wife, Marilyn, were doing what many American couples were doing on the eve of Independence Day, entertaining neighbors at their lakefront home in Bay Village, Ohio. After watching the film Strange Holiday, Dr. Sheppard drifted off to sleep on a daybed in the living room, while Marilyn saw their guests out. What happened in the early morning hours of the 4th of July would become the focal point of the most infamous murder trial of the 20th century. Marilyn Sheppard was brutally bludgeoned to death in her bed with an unknown instrument. The sheer violence of the attack was staggering. Forensic reports indicated she was struck 35 times in the head and body. The master bedroom was absolutely covered in blood spatter, with drops of blood trailing onto the floors throughout the rest of the house. When authorities arrived on the scene, they found a thoroughly disoriented Dr. Sheppard in shock. He was shirtless, his trousers were soaking wet from the lake, and crucially, there was only a single bloodstain found on the knee of his pants. Here is where the prosecution's narrative collides with physical reality. The bedroom was an abattoir, a close quarters, violent bludgeoning, involving 35 distinct blows would guarantee that the perpetrator was drenched in the victim's blood. Yet, Dr. Sheppard was remarkably clean of blood evidence, save for that single stain. How does a man commit a crime of such messy, frantic brutality without getting covered in blood spatter? But the physical impossibilities don't stop at the lack of blood. They extend to Sam Sheppard's own body. Sheppard claimed that he was awoken by his wife's cries, rushed upstairs, and saw a white biped form grappling with someone in the bedroom. He was then struck down and knocked unconscious. After coming to, he chased the intruder out of the house and down to the Lake Erie beach, where they tussled, and Sheppard was knocked unconscious for a second time. The authorities, fueled by a hostile local media, quickly decided Sheppard was lying. They believed he murdered Marilyn, staged the house by hiding stolen items like his wristwatch and fraternity ring in a canvas bag in the bushes, and faked his own injuries to cover his tracks. But a detailed medical analysis proves this faked injury theory is virtually impossible. Sheppard's defense attorney, William Corrigan, brought forward the medical report of neurosurgeon Dr. Charles Elkins. Dr. Elkins conducted a thorough examination of Sheppard following the attack and made several critical findings. He diagnosed Sheppard with a severe cervical concussion and significant nerve injury. Elkins specifically noted that Sheppard had suffered an injury in the region of the second cervical vertebra, the back of the neck. Most importantly, Dr. Elkins documented that Sheppard presented with many absent or weak reflexes, particularly on the left side of his body. As any medical professional will testify, while a suspect might be able to fake a limp or a headache, it is physiologically impossible to fake or simulate missing reflex responses. You cannot consciously stop your body's autonomic nervous system from reacting to a reflex test. Sheppard's severe neurological trauma was real, documented, and completely inconsistent with a man who had simply staged a crime scene. The prosecution had another theory they used to try and tie Sheppard to the brutal attack. During the investigation, it was noted that 2 of Marilyn Sheppard's teeth had been broken and pieces had been pulled from her mouth. The prosecution spun a compelling cinematic theory. Marilyn had fought back and violently bitten her attacker during the struggle. If true, this would mean the killer was walking around with a severe bite mark. But once again, the physical evidence cleared Sam Sheppard. Attorney William Corrigan pointed out to the jury that Dr. Sheppard did not have a single open wound on his body. To put the final nail in the bite mark theory, we turn to the brilliant criminologist Paul L. Kirk, whose forensic analysis would eventually become legendary in this case. Kirk analyzed the condition of the victim's mouth and dismantled the prosecution's claim. He pointed out that if Marilyn's teeth had actually been broken by a violent blow to the face during a struggle, the shattered pieces of those teeth would have been found inside her mouth, and her lips would have shown severe corresponding damage. Neither of those things was true. The teeth were not broken by a blow, and Marilyn had not bitten her attacker. The prosecution's theory was a forensic mirage, designed to explain away the fact that Sam Sheppard simply did not have the physical injuries of a man who had just engaged in a life or death, hand-to-hand struggle with a victim fighting for her life. When you strip away the sensationalist headlines and look strictly at the medical and forensic analysis, a clear picture emerges. The lack of blood on the suspect, the unfakeable spinal and nerve damage, and the absence of any defensive wounds or bite marks all point to one horrifying reality. Dr. Sam Sheppard was telling the truth. He was a victim of the intruder, just as his wife was. But as we will see in Chapter 2, the evidence didn't matter to a city and a media apparatus that had already made up its mind. When Dr. Sam Sheppard's first murder trial began on the 18th of October 1954, it did not take place in a vacuum of objective justice. Instead, it took place in a city gripped by hysteria. To truly analyze the wrongful conviction of Sam Sheppard, we have to examine the unprecedented role of the local media, an institution that one federal judge later declared had taken upon itself the role of accuser, judge, and jury. The investigation into Marilyn Sheppard's brutal murder was almost immediately hijacked by the Cleveland press. Instead of waiting for forensic results, the newspaper began directing the police investigation through its front pages. On the 21st of July 1954, the paper ran a highly aggressive editorial titled, "Do It Now, Dr. Gerber," publicly demanding that the coroner, Dr. Samuel Gerber, hold an immediate inquest. In a stunning display of media influence, Dr. Gerber capitulated just hours later, announcing an inquest for the very next day. But the Cleveland press didn't stop at demanding inquests. 9 days later, on the 30th of July, they published another front-page editorial titled, "Why Isn't Sam Sheppard in Jail?" which was later updated to the even more demanding, "Quit stalling and bring him in." The pressure was insurmountable. That exact same night, Dr. Sam Sheppard was arrested and taken in for police interrogation. The narrative had been completely set before a single piece of evidence was presented in court. This trial was surrounded by what the US Supreme Court would later definitively label a carnival atmosphere. The local media continuously ran salacious, inflammatory stories that had absolutely no basis in factual evidence. In one egregious example during the trial, a popular radio show broadcast a fabricated report claiming a woman in New York City was Sheppard's mistress and had birthed his illegitimate child. Because the jury was not sequestered, 2 jurors openly admitted to the judge that they had heard this highly prejudicial broadcast. Yet, shockingly, the judge did not dismiss them. Modern legal analysis makes it clear. The jurors were almost certainly contaminated by the press both before and during the trial. With the media having successfully convicted Sheppard in the court of public opinion, the prosecution still needed to provide a legal motive for the jury. They found it in Susan Hayes. Hayes was a 24-year-old laboratory technician at Bayview Hospital, where Sheppard worked, and the two had been engaged in an affair. The prosecution built their entire theory of motive around this affair. But an affair is a motive, not a murder weapon. To secure a conviction, the prosecution had to explain how Marilyn was killed, and they had a glaring problem. There was no murder weapon. With no physical weapon recovered from the bloody bedroom, Dr. Gerber introduced a highly speculative theory that would perfectly fit the prosecution's narrative of a killer doctor. He testified that the wounds on Marilyn Sheppard's body were caused by a surgical weapon. This was a masterful, albeit deeply flawed, piece of forensic storytelling. By simply uttering the phrase surgical weapon, Gerber psychologically linked the brutal bludgeoning to Dr. Sheppard's profession as an osteopathic neurosurgeon. It didn't matter that no such surgical weapon was ever found at the house, on the beach, or anywhere else. The seed was planted. It would take 12 years for this forensic fallacy to be properly dismantled. In 1966, After the US Supreme Court struck down the original conviction due to the biased judge and media carnival, a retrial was ordered. This time, the jury was sequestered, and Dr. Sheppard was represented by the fiercely aggressive attorney F. Lee Bailey. When Dr. Gerber once again took the stand to push his surgical weapon theory, Bailey did not let him deliver a monologue. Bailey aggressively cross-examined the coroner, methodically trapping him until Gerber was forced to make a devastating admission before the sequestered jury. The investigators had never actually found a murder weapon. Furthermore, Gerber had to admit that they had absolutely zero physical evidence tying Sam Sheppard to the murder itself. In his closing arguments, Bailey scathingly dismissed the prosecution's entire case as 10 pounds of hogwash in a 5-pound bag. By breaking down the myth of the surgical weapon, Bailey proved that the prosecution had built their 1954 conviction not on physical evidence, but on media-driven character assassination. But if the weapon wasn't a phantom surgical instrument, what was it? And what happens when a piece of physical evidence that matches the wounds perfectly is suddenly unearthed from the dirt of the Sheppard estate nearly 3 decades later? We will explore this bizarre discovery and the FBI's involvement in Chapter 4. F. Lee Bailey didn't just tear down the prosecution's case. He introduced an entirely new scientific analysis that would change forensic history. Dr. Paul, a brilliant criminologist who had painstakingly collected and preserved putative blood spatter evidence from the Sheppard home back in 1955. This is the core of the analytical exoneration of Dr. Sam Sheppard. The prosecution had always relied on the sheer volume of blood in the bedroom to horrify the jury. But Dr. Kirk didn't look at the blood as mere gore. He looked at it as a map. By analyzing the trajectory, the velocity, and the distinct patterns of the blood droplets cast off by the murder weapon as it swung through the air, Kirk was able to reconstruct the physical mechanics of the brutal attack. Kirk's forensic analysis yielded a bombshell conclusion. Based on the geometry of the cast-off blood spatter on the bedroom walls, the killer was unequivocally holding the weapon in their left hand. The arc of the swinging weapon and the resulting blood trail could only have been produced by a left-handed perpetrator. Dr. Sam Sheppard was right-handed. This singular piece of blood spatter analysis proved absolutely crucial to the trial. It was a hard, mathematically verifiable, physical fact that squarely contradicted the prosecution's entire theory. After just 12 hours of deliberation on the 16th of November 1966, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. For the first time in over a decade, Dr. Sam Sheppard was a truly free man. But if this right-handed doctor didn't wield the weapon that shattered his wife's skull, who did? What if the real weapon had been hidden right under their noses the entire time? For nearly 3 decades, the physical murder weapon in the Sheppard case remained undiscovered. What did the left-handed killer actually use to bludgeon Marilyn Sheppard 35 times? The answer, or at least a highly compelling piece of it, may have been buried in the dirt just yards away from the crime scene the entire time. On the 19th of November 1982, the current owner of the former Sheppard house was digging a trench in the backyard to lay a new water line. Just 5 inches deep in the sandy soil, his shovel struck something hard. It was a brass fireplace tong remarkably well preserved. The individual who found it wrapped the tongs in newspapers and handed it over to the authorities. Recognizing the potential historical and forensic significance, Bay Village Police Chief Pete Gray immediately contacted the FBI, requesting a full laboratory analysis. The FBI laboratory's metallurgy section provided the scientific answer. The fireplace tongs were made of brass. Brass is a metal alloy that is highly resistant to corrosion. This metallurgical fact perfectly explains how the tool survived nearly 3 decades underground without degrading, remaining intact enough for forensic examination. When the FBI laboratory processed the evidence, they found more biological clues. An examination of the tongs and the brown wrapping paper they were submitted in revealed 2 distinct hairs. The FBI determined these hairs were suitable for microscopic comparisons and carefully mounted them on glass microscope slides for future analysis. Dr. Samuel Gerber had commissioned a highly detailed wax replica of Marilyn Sheppard's head. This wax model was a gruesome but necessary forensic tool, reproducing in exact detail the 35 distinct wounds exactly as they appeared on the victim. The FBI laboratory and the coroner's office set out to test the newly discovered brass tongs against the wax replica to see if this instrument could produce identical wounds. The preliminary results of this physical analysis were staggering, and they introduced an entirely new theory into the armchair analysis of this case. According to a November 1982 report in the Plain Dealer, the coroner's office matched the tool to some of the 35 blows. However, Police Chief Pete Gray noted a massive forensic discrepancy. He stated, "Some of the blows would be consistent with the object we found, while some others would not be." This physical inconsistency led investigators to speculate a chilling new hypothesis that two weapons could have been used in the murder of Marilyn Sheppard. If the brass tongs matched only a specific subset of the wounds, it strongly suggests a second weapon, and possibly a frantic, chaotic struggle involving a frantic weapon swap, or even a second attacker. While authorities eventually cautioned that the tool could have been planted by a publicity seeker, the discovery of the brass tongs remains one of the most compelling physical anomalies in the case. It perfectly demonstrates how the physical evidence in the Sheppard case continually contradicts the simple, clean narrative presented by the prosecution in 1954. A man who was not only familiar with the Sheppard home, but who actually admitted his blood was at the crime scene, Richard Ebeling. In 1954, Ebeling was an occasional handyman and window washer for the Sheppards. He knew the property intimately, and according to later testimony, he found Marilyn Sheppard highly attractive. Initially, Ebeling flew under the radar, but in 1959, detectives were questioning him regarding a series of local burglaries. Ebeling ultimately confessed and led the police to his stolen loot. When investigators searched through his stash, they found something that should have stopped the Sheppard investigation in its tracks: 2 rings that belonged to the murdered Marilyn Sheppard. Ebeling claimed he stole the rings in 1958, 4 years after the murder, from a box explicitly marked personal property of Marilyn Sheppard, located at Sam Sheppard's brother's house. But the circumstantial evidence didn't end there. During subsequent questioning, Ebeling made a shocking admission. He told police that his own blood was present at the 1954 crime scene. His explanation: he claimed he had simply cut his finger while washing the Sheppard's windows just prior to the murder, leaving blood behind on the premises. Investigators gave Ebeling a lie detector test regarding Marilyn's murder, and the initial examiner concluded he showed no deception. This single test result was so heavily relied upon that even Sam Sheppard's legendary defense attorney, Bailey, completely dismissed Ebeling as a suspect during the 1966 retrial. Bailey later admitted during a 2000 civil trial that he only rejected Ebeling because he thought he passed a good polygraph test. When later experts re-evaluated that exact same 1959 polygraph data, they found the results were either entirely inconclusive or that Ebeling was, in fact, being deceptive. Bailey stated on the record that had he known the truth about the polygraph, he would have presented Ebeling as the killer to the 1966 jury. The failure to properly analyze Ebeling in the 1950s had deadly consequences. Throughout his life, Richard Ebeling was surrounded by women who died under highly suspicious circumstances. In 1984, Ebeling was convicted of murdering Ethel Mae Durkin, a wealthy, elderly widow in Lakewood, Ohio. Ebeling was her guardian and executor, and an autopsy following an exhumation revealed injuries that completely contradicted his claim that she had simply fallen down the stairs. Coincidentally, Durkin's 2 sisters had also died in highly suspicious, violent ways. One was savagely beaten and strangled, and the other died after a supposed fall down the basement steps that broke both her arms and legs. According to a co-worker, Kathy Wagner Dial, Ebeling explicitly confessed to Marilyn's murder in 1983. A fellow prison inmate also reported that Ebeling confessed to the crime. In the late 1990s, Dr. Sam Sheppard's son, Sam Ree Sheppard, filed a wrongful imprisonment civil lawsuit against the state of Ohio to definitively clear his father's name. Marilyn Sheppard's body was exhumed, and advanced DNA analysis was applied to the preserved blood evidence from the 1954 crime scene. The DNA results proved definitively that blood from a third person, belonging to neither Marilyn nor Sam Sheppard, was present in that bloody bedroom. During the civil trial, a DNA expert for the plaintiff testified with 90% confidence that one of the blood spots belonged to Richard Ebeling. However, the state's defense lawyers claimed the blood evidence had been tainted over the decades. Furthermore, the original 1955 serology reports, which typed the mystery blood on the closet door as type O, but Richard Ebeling's blood was type A. Because of these forensic discrepancies and the strict burden of proof, the 2000 civil jury deliberated for just 3 hours before ruling that Sam's son had failed to prove wrongful imprisonment. While Ebeling remains the most compelling alternative suspect, he isn't the only one born from modern analysis. A 2002 analytical book presented a radical alternative theory. James Call, an Air Force deserter who was on a multi-state crime spree and passing through Cleveland at the exact time of the murder. This theory takes Bailey's dismantling of the surgical weapon and replaces it with a firearm. Through comparative photographic analysis, the author theorized that the unique, crescent-shaped bloodstain patterns on Marilyn Sheppard's pillowcase weren't made by a surgical instrument or even a brass fireplace tong, but by the distinct physical profile of a Luger pistol being used as a bludgeon.